Vaetchanan. Shalom, shalom לכולם, and שבוע טוב לכולם, to our subscribers, followers at different platforms. Welcome to our weekly limud, the Parsha of the week. Here we are a little bit late. This is the Parsha of the Torah last week. The Parashat Vaetchanan. Image, all word, understanding the secret of idolatry. In the world, we give loosely definition based on our background, based on prejudices of others, things that we don't understand. We don't understand the things of others, and we call them idolatry. The Torah has got its own definitions. The definition that all should be in past or transmitted from the Gadolim of previous generations, so that we do not, or each man goes according to his own definitions in the interpretation of the Torah word or concept. In the world of Midian, we see in a religious world, man has hidden himself behind a certain concept, behind his own prejudices and biasness to define things. This is not what the Torah is teaching us. The Parsha Vaetchanan, found in a book of Devarim, translated as Deuteronomy, is one of the most fundamental sections of the Torah, as it recounts Moshe's great farewell address before the entry into the promised land, the land of Canaan. The text opens with Moshe's moving plea, the plea that is what is meant Vaetchanan, from which the Parsha's name is derived, begging God, meaning Hashem, to allow him to cross the river Jordan. Despite the divine refusal, he is granted permission to gaze upon the land from a mounted peak while preparing Joshua to become his successor. When we look at the African tradition, all of the Bantu Israelites as traditions, everywhere, wherever they are, they have got their unbroken tradition on success. Contrary to what we are learning from the academia. In a powerful exaltation, he then calls upon the people to maintain strict obedience, recording the liberation at Sinai, and the warning against all forms of idolatry, emphasizing that the divine manifested through speech rather than a physical image. This section is particularly crucial because it contains the repetition of the Ten Commandments as read at the Borot, to the new generation, featuring nuances such as the use of the term observe regarding the Shabbat. It also houses the Shema Israel passage, the core of the faith. The core of the faith of Bnei Israel is believing in one God, not many, but one, which proclaims the oneness of God and mandates the obligation to love Him, to teach the Torah to one's children, and to affix mezuzot, ritual object placed on the doorpost. Finally, Moshe recalls the election of Israel rooted in love and the promise made to the patriarchs, while establishing practical measures such as a site of refuge. In short, this parasha serves as a vibrant reminder of spiritual fidelity and the transmission of a divine legacy. In Devarim chapter 4, verse 12, Moshe reminds the people, "You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form. There was only a voice." In Devarim chapter 4, verse 15 to 16, warn against the creation of an image, statue, or representation intended for worship. In Devarim chapter 4, verses 35 to 39, the Torah affirms that Hashem is God and that there is none else. Finally, the injunction neither to add nor subtract from the mitzvot appears in Devarim chapter 4, Pasuk or verse 2. The Area Kadosh comments on these formulations, notably within the volume of Likutei Torah, Sharia Pesukim, and the Sharia HaMitzvot. For the Area Kadosh, the statement, "You heard a voice, but you saw no form," does not merely signify a prohibition against crafting statutes. It reveals a fundamental metaphysical truth, the divine essence, known as Atzimut Ein Sof, is neither body, nor form, nor image, nor limit. Any visible form belongs to the realm of creatures, and the kelim, that is, the vessels or limited modalities that make the divine light accessible to the various world. God Himself is not a kelim. He is not one of force among others, and it cannot be reduced to any representation, even one that is highly elevated or seemingly spiritual. In the language of Lurianic Kabbalah, the Sephirot such as Chesed, loving kindness, Gevurah, strength of judgment, Tiferet, harmony, etc., are not God in His essence. They are the pathways and modalities through which the divine light manifests within the order of creation. Thus, expressions like right, left, face, arm, or king, as well as the symbolic descriptions found in a Zohar, must never be understood in a literal or physical sense. They serve to express in human language spiritual relationships and the degrees of manifestation of divine light. Idolatry begins precisely when one mistakes a channel of liberation for the source itself, when a limited manifestation is confused with the infinity that it transcended it and sustain its existence. The verse from Devarim chapter 4, verse 12, affirms, "You heard the sound of words, but you saw no forms. There was only a voice." This distinction is decisive in the thought of the Area Kadosh. Israel is indeed experienced an authentic liberation at Sinai. God remains neither absent nor silent. However, this liberation does not take the form of a visible object, a representation that men could fixate upon, hold, all, master. The people hear a voice, call, but see no temuna, no form. The liberation is thus received as a speech that descended toward man and calls it to him, rather than an image that man could capture or possess. In the Irish vocabulary, the term call, voice, meaning voice, can be understood as the expression of an inner flow that preceded the full articulation of speech. It is frequently linked to Zair Anpin, the configuration of the 6 midot attribute, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferet, Netzachod, and the Yasod, through which the divine influx unfolds and organizes itself before being communicated to the world. Moshe, specifically, the voice is often related to Tiferet, the principle of harmony, synthesizes and mercy, which unifies the pluralities of expression and judgment. The voice thus represents a spiritual entirety not yet fixed in an external form. It is a movement of liberation, a flow preparing to be expressed. Dibur, all articulated speech, is associated with Malchut. Malchut translated as kingdom. Malchut is the dimension through which the influx, received from higher degrees, becomes expression, language, transmission, and presence in the lower world. In this structure, the voice corresponds to the living, inner, and the subtle content of liberation, while speech corresponds to its determined, intelligible expression and are addressed to the other. The voice is therefore not separated from speech. It is its inner root and energy. Speech is the culmination of the voice when it becomes communicable. Within the framework of Matan Torah, Ma'amad Sinai, this distinction allows us to grasp that divine liberation cannot be reduced to a sensory phenomenon. The fire, the sound, and the word are levushin, garment, or a support of manifestation that allows an infinitely superior light to be received by finite creatures. But none of this support neither the fire, nor the voice, nor even the letters that were heard should be confused with the divine essence. God reveals himself through them, but he is not contained by none of them. Likewise, when a Kabbalist text speaks of voice, speech, or a spiritual configuration, it does not describe corporal realities in a God, but rather the modes through which the divine influx becomes perceptible and active in the world. The fact that Israel heard a voice rather than beheld an image signifies that the correct relationship to the divine is one of listening. Seeing an image can create an illusion that one possesses what is seen. The object can be framed, measured, reproduced, or worshipped. Hearing a word, by contrast, places the listener in a position of responsibility. A word is addressed to him, demands a response, and they engage his very existence. At Sinai, Israel does not receive an objectifiable vision of God. It receives the Torah, that is, a divine word that becomes a covenant, commandment, the orientation for life. The revelation at Sinai, therefore, does not grant man the right to define God according to his own categories, nor to transform a spiritual experience into a religious possession. It gives him a mission to listen, to receive, study, and fulfill the mitzvot. The Torah then becomes the place where divine transcendence concretely meets human action. It is precisely because God cannot be contained within an image that his will can transform all of human life. The divine word is not confined to a place or an object, but penetrates man's act, word, thought, and the relationships. This idea can be summarized as follows: liberation, possession of God; liberation, reception of a divine word that engages man. The thought of Ari Kadosh allows us to understand the paradox of Sinai. It is the moment of the greatest Gilui, divine unveiling, yet God remains entirely beyond all created perception. In the Lurianic doctrine of Tzimtzum, the infinite light, all Ein Sof cannot be received directly by finite beings. It must pass through a gradation, a veiling, a measure, and adapted vessel. This process should not be understood as a physical displacement of God. God is not in space, but as a way of describing the possibility for the infinite to receive a light that would otherwise annihilate it entirely. Thus, it is Sinai. God truly reveals himself. This revelation passes through mediations, fire, voice, speech, and the letter of the Torah. Yet none of these mediations is God himself. The absence of image protected the divine unity and the infinity. The fire of Sinai is therefore not a form of God. It is a levush, a garment, or a support of manifestation. The voice, too, is a vehicle of liberation, not the divine essence. From this perspective, idolatry is not limited to bowing before a statue. At its root, it consists of granting absolute autonomy to a created reality or a particular force. A person may thus fall into a more subtle form of idolatry by absolutizing power, worth, intellect, nature, human authority, or even a particular spiritual experience. The problem is not recognizing that the forces, mediations, and the spiritual levels exist in a world. Kabbalites self-describe them in detail. The problem is forgetting that none of these realities exist independently of the divine will. This is the profound meaning of any odd melavdo. There is nothing beside him. This does not mean that the world is imaginary or without value. It means that the world has no autonomous existence before God. Its existence is continually received from the divine word and the will. When Moshe says neither to add nor subtract from the commandment, the Lulatic reading sees more than a requirement of legal principle or discipline. Each mitzvah possesses a precise spiritual structure. It operates a unification, a yichud, and participates in the repair, the tikkun of the world and of the soul. According to this logic, adding on one's own initiative amounts to claiming to know better than the divine wisdom, the structure of the tikkun. Subtracting amounts to interrupting a channel that the Torah has established. Fulfilling a mitzvah in accordance with the Torah allows one to connect material action to its spiritual root. Obedience is therefore not intellectual passivity. It is the acceptance that the correct relationship to the infinity does not arise from human imagination, but from the Torah given at Sinai. This idea reached the summit in the Shema Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The word Echad, meaning one, does not simply mean that God is a unique being among other beings. It means that all apparent multiplicity, world, forces, beings, event, remains included within a divine unity. In the approach inspired by the Ari, to understand the ends of Baruch Hu is to integrate the following. Hashem evokes the transcendent dimension of mercy and the infinity. Elokeinu invokes the divine presence that reveals itself in the order of forces, laws, and judgment. Echad affirms that these dimensions are not two powers. They are unified in absolute divine unity. Divine unity. This is why the prohibition of idolatry is linked to the Shema. Idolatry fragments what is one. It treats a manifestation, a force, or an image as though it were independent. The Shema restore unity. All proceed from God, and it remains independent upon Him. We see, Chavarim, this has been the human challenges, particularly in the public institutions, different system, different religious discipline. Every man is left to his own imagination, to his own definitions, and it does cause havoc to our world. Many interpret, many render his own definition to what should not be defined by you or by myself. Stay tuned. Just as a pause.
Bana Congo, Bana Congo, yeah, Bana Congo. Rise up, Bana Congo.
For the first time in history, a work of halacha brings together the wisdom of Ben Ish Hai, the mystical secrets of the Ari Hakadosh, and the rabbinical decrees of the chief rabbi of Africa for the Shomrei, the observance of Nusak Afriki. Ben Meshek Beti, Nusak Afriki. Volume 1. A sefer of restoration, an act of memory, an instrument of sanctification. For the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel, guardians of an eternal covenant. This is not just another book, it is a path toward holiness.
Welcome to Shidduch Afriki, the Bantu Israelite matrimonial matchmaking agency, supervised by the Chief Rabbi of Africa Pinchas Eliyahu Shadi. Are you seeking an authentic union based on halakhic principles? We're here to guide you every step of the way. Book your interview. +33 95624 5409.
Baruch Hashem, we are back again. Continue with the theme of the Torah portion, Vaetchanan. Our followers, our scribes, do yourself a favor to acquire books that the Chief Rabbinate of Africa has published. It will help you out in order to dispel what has traumatized many communities in the world. And that the name, your God is good, your God is evil, and so forth and so forth. The God of the Torah, the God of Bnei Israel, all has been observed by Bnei Israel, it is written in the Torah, is one. We look at what the Bantu Israelite held as long as they have been in different parts of the world, understanding the secret of idolatry according to the Bantu Israelites. Traditional Bantu Israelite cosmology does not always formulate the notion of idolatry in the strictly biblical or rabbinical Jewish sense, meaning the act of worshiping a creature or any object in a place of the sole creator. However, it possesses a fundamental distinction between the supreme source of all life, designated as Zambi, of the ancestors, Bakulu, and the spiritual powers, and the ritual objects such as the Ngisi. The cosmology of Dikenga present existence as a cycle between the visible world, Kuniseke, and the spiritual world, Kumbemba, which are separated and linked by the Kalunga line. The four stages, Musoni, Kala, Tukula, and the Luvemba, express conception, birth, maturity, and the return to the ancestral world. In a spiritual reading concerning the 10 tribes of Israel, spiritual and religious disorder begins when a reality that must remain a sign, a support, a memory of the ancestors or a mediation within the order of the world, becomes an autonomous reality, one to which human beings attribute the ultimate source of life, power, healing, and destiny. This shift aligns perfectly with the structure of idolatry as defined in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Tractate Avodah Zarah. Utterment did. Before we continue, just to add a few words, Avodah Zarah, according to Masechet, we go into a pause for a few seconds.
Bana Congo, Bana Congo, yeah, Bana Congo. Rise up, Bana Congo, Bana Congo.
For the first time in history, a work of halacha brings together the wisdom of Ben Ish Hai, the mystical secrets of the Ari Hakadosh, and the rabbinical decrees of the chief rabbi of Africa for the Shomrei, the observance of Nusak Afriki. Ben Meshek Beti, Nusak Afriki. Volume 1. A Sefer of restoration, an act of memory, an instrument of sanctification. For the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel, guardians of an eternal covenant. This is not just another book, it is a path toward holiness. For the first time in history, a work of halacha brings together the wisdom of Ben Ish Hai, the mystical secrets of the Ari Hakadosh, and the rabbinical decrees of the chief rabbi of Africa for the Shomrei, the observance of Nusak Afriki. Ben Meshek Beti, Nusak Afriki. Volume 1. A Sefer of restoration, an act of memory, an instrument of sanctification. For the descendants of the 10 tribes of Israel, guardians of an eternal covenant. This is not just another book, it is a path toward holiness.
Welcome once again. My sincere apology for that a technical problem. Baruch Hashem, we are back. Grant us to return to our theme of the source or the root of Avodah Zarah. As I was saying, in Masechet Avodah Zarah, Talmud Yerushalmi, there, our sages have explained what constitutes Avodah Zarah, even the things that were introduced in your culture by the civilization, in your society, and this includes the power, include the death, the birthday of our respective dignitaries, all personalities within our societies, the buying, or purchasing, or been entering some of the agreements. Depends which what is the subject of the agreement. This could also lead to Avodah Zarah. In other words, the problem arises when the mundo, the human being, forgets that every received force must remain ordained toward life, balance, truth, and the community. It then transforms a specific force into an absolute, an object, an ancestor, a natural power, worth, a leader, ritual, all his own will, In the biblical language, this is where Avodah Zarah begins, foreign worship. Taking that which is created or limited and mistaking it for the source of being. Dengisi, for example, should not be automatically reduced to an idol. In many Bantu Israelite tradition, it designates an object or ritual device linked to a power, a function of protection, healing, justice, or mediation. In this category, we find the menorah, the table of showbread, the ark, and the veil, and so forth. However, from the perspective of strict monotheism, spiritual danger emerges if the object receives a prayer, sacrifices, invocations, or ultimate trust, as if it possessed independent power. The object then ceases to be cultural symbol or a remembrance, and become a competitor to God, Shalom, within human consciousness. Thus, the evil is not the matter itself, wood, stones, water, metal, or image, but the attribution of absolute spiritual sovereignty, what which is not the creator. For the Bnei Israel, this provides a very powerful language for understanding the root of this deviation. Idolatry is a breach of balance. It ruptures the harmony between the visible and the invisible world, between the living and the memory of the elders, between the person and the community, and between power and the service of life. When a man seeks to capture force for himself, power, worth, domination, revenge, magical protection, or control over destiny, he diverts the vital force from its righteous purpose. Like what is happening now? You are introduced to many things within our society, our respective society. And we are made to embrace and to praise, even to the point of worshiping. Those things is part of human progress. He ceases to be a guardian of the world's balance. He becomes a servant of fear, greed, or raw power. In this perspective, an idol can be material, but it can also be internal. The worship of money, prestige, and a political leader. A political leader, violence, the clan, personal success, or even one's own spiritual experience. This thought is therefore the concrete and the daily expression of Tiferet. All this reflect how our daily perception, our daily life. If you don't show this, if you don't demonstrate this, society has got labels for you without realizing that this is the dust, or it is a obvious idol, and thus adultery. To effectively combat idolatry, according to the Torah Aleph, it is not enough to simply destroy an object. First, there must be reorientation of the heart, the word, the gesture, and the community. Without this, any form of material destruction is entirely useless. In a perspective of faithfulness to the one God Zambi, and so Baruch, this involves clearly proclaiming that all force belongs to the Creator, and that no ancestor, spirit, object, place, human being, country, political system, technology, including military technology, all natural phenomenon possesses independent power. Ancestors may be honored through memory, direct communication with them, gratitude, request for support, as a son asks his father, the transmission of their past, present, and the future virtues, respect for family, and the continuation of their righteous works. But they do not substitute for the unique and the supreme creator, Zambi, Ensof Baruch. Political agendas, political system, and religious system that were imposed to different communities, including the Bantu Israelite, for different agendas, and ultimately the conquest of their respective land. Our idea, our understanding, our perspective, and our conception of the Zambi was eroded by the force of power and the force of the law. The struggle against idolatry must also involve replacement, not just prohibition. Fear is replaced by trust in the hands of practice of spiritual dependence by prayer, the search for occult power by study, justice, and the practice of tradition, and the right that seeks to manipulate the invisible by act of kindness, liberation, and the collective responsibility. In this way, spiritual energy is not suppressed, it is purified and elevated. In the vocabulary of the Torah, this is the transition from the confusion of power toward divine unity. Shema Israel, Ki Hashem Elokeinu, Hu Hashem Echad. Many of us do not know that version of the Shema, consisting of 9 words. But yet, this is the Tanaim's teaching. Contemporary word emphasizes that in a Bantu thought, the universe is often understood as a network of interdependent vital forces, where evil is associated with their disturbance and where right aim, among other things, at the social transmission and rebalancing. And the rebalancing. This insight can be fruitful in teaching that the battle against idolatry is not a war against Africa. Memory, ancestors, all culture symbols. It is the refusal of all servitude toward any limited power, so that life, community, and the memory are all brought back toward one God. Covering in a different platform, this is our Torah. This is the life that our ancestors despite and amidst of the prejudices and biasness, because they were not understood by the outer world. But this is the life our ancestors have lived by. I look forward to learn Torah with you. And the Bisharat Shmaya, we continue, and we will see each other. Still this week, Bisharat Shmaya. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen. Amen.